Hello, welcome to this course on literature and life. This is the first lecture that we begin with. The topic is what is literature? Here we have an outline of the topics or subtopics that we would deal with in this lecture. Definitions and descriptions of literature, conventional views presented by W.J. Long, W.H. Hudson and R.J. Rees, and then certain contemporary views advanced by Raymond Williams, Terry Eagleton, Andrew Bennet and Nicholas Royle. Thereafter we will move on to the transformative model presented by Olivia Fialho and then finally summarize the lecture. As we mentioned in the outline, we have certain topics for which we have specifically mentioned certain objectives. The objectives of this presentation are to provide a working definition of literature, to consider conventional views of scholars like Long, Hudson and Rees on literature, to discuss contemporary views of scholars like Terry Eagleton on literature, to examine certain identifiable features of literature which distinguish it from other forms of writing, to present a transformative model of literature which is going to be of great use for us. First, let us begin with this working definition of literature. I have phrased it in my own words like this. Literature is an imaginative expression of an experience, both subjective and objective, in an structured form through a creative use of both available and invented languages, exploiting and enriching the cultural resources of a society. When we say invented languages, we mean to say coining new words and phrases or even sentences in a kind of new language as well. The key words in this definition are expression of an individual and the experience of an individual in a structured form using language and also literary forms. The main focus is on use of language, and this is done in a cultural context where certain values and visions contribute to the making of meaning through literature, which altogether enrich people, readers and humanity as a whole. Now let us see the conventional views of W.J. Long given in his book English Literature, its history and its significance for the life of the English speaking world. It was originally written in 1909, but then it has been expanded several times and now we have a reprint of it in India from Rupa Publications. Long says literature is a place of dreams and magic, and it has three major qualities like artistic value concerning the beauty of expression, then suggestive value referring to the depth of meaning in a literary work of art, and finally permanent value which refers to the quality of appeal to different kinds of readers in different ages and in different places. There are two tests to identify whether the permanent value is good or not. One is universality and the other is style. We have a beautiful example of a quote from Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra to suggest this kind of universality and style. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. This sentence has been used in different contexts by people for their own purposes. This sentence appeals to all kinds of people throughout the world. Now let us see artistic value. It means all art is an expression of life in forms of truth and beauty, or rather it is a reflection of some truth and beauty which are in the world but which remain unnoticed until brought to our attention by some sensitive human soul. Literature is associated with sensitivity. Sensitive people write literature and more often sensitive people read literature and respond to it. And what is that appeal or what is that value, artistic value that we have in literature? That is truth and beauty. Here we have a quotation from William Wordsworth's The Solitary Reaper. The music in my heart I bore, long after it was heard no more. These are the last two lines of this poem, The Solitary Reaper. The music in my heart I bore, long after it was heard no more. It reverberates in readers throughout their life. Thus, literature appeals to our sense of the beautiful and truthful. Now we see suggestive value. Literature basically appeals to our emotions and imagination rather than to our intellect. That is where we refer to this sensitivity. What literature says is not so important, but what it does to us matters a lot. When we read literature, it does something to us. We will see something of it when we look at the transformative model. Literature aims at both instruction and delight. These are the two major functions of literature, education and pleasure or entertainment. It is delight that attracts readers and instruction that retains them forever. First, literature may give us some pleasure, but how do we or why do we go back to literature and again? That is where this instruction or educational value comes in. Here we have a quotation from E.R. Brightwhite's novel To Serve with Love about teachers. Every teacher should have a fund of ready information on which to draw. He should keep that fund supplied regularly by new experiences, new thoughts and discoveries, by reading and moving around among people from whom he can acquire such things. This passage occurs in this novel, To Serve with Love. Any teacher anywhere will find this piece of information very useful to update oneself, to constantly improve the fund of knowledge one should have so that one can act or one can function as a good teacher. Now we move on to the next value, that is permanent value. All kinds of literature are produced, printed and sold throughout the world at all times, but only some remain permanent for various reasons. And here we have two tests of permanent literature which we referred to earlier, universality and style. These two contribute to making good or great literature. Good literature knows no nationality. Similarly, good literature knows no religion. Further, we can restate it in a different way. Great literature knows no nationality. Great literature also knows no religion. Great literature or good literature is universal or common to all kinds of people. Great literature or good literature concerns elementary passions and emotions. These are common emotions like love and hate, joy and sorrow, fear and faith, or courage. To give an example, the heroism presented in Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, always appeal to us. And the phenomenon of evil discussed in the book of Job continues to appeal to all kinds of readers. Style is a person, it is said. It refers to the personality of the author or the individual who writes the piece of writing. It is the unconscious expression of the writer's own personality. It may be his individual personality, it can also partake of the collective personality of the society in which he or she lives or the whole of humanity. To give an example for this, we have a quote from John Keats' poem Endymion. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. It's a single sentence from this long poem Endymion, but this one line continues to appeal to readers throughout the world across centuries. Let's look at one more conventional view from William Henry Hudson's book, An Introduction to the Study of Literature. Literature is a vital record of what men have seen in life, what they have experienced of it, what they have thought and felt about those aspects of it which have the most immediate and enduring interest for all of us. It is thus fundamentally an expression of life through the medium of language. So, what is seen, what is experienced, what is thought and what is felt is what we have in literature, and it is fundamentally an expression of life through the medium of language. So, we focus on the two phrases, expression of life and medium of language. Life and literature go together through language. We have one example from W. H. Davies' famous poem Leisure. These are the first two lines. What is this life, if full of care, we have no time to stand and stare. Particularly today in this 21st century, as we move on with this pandemic and other disasters in the world, we are busy. What is this life, if full of care, we have no time to stand and stare. Another conventional view we have from R.J. Rees in his book English Literature, an Introduction for Foreign Readers. He says, literature is writing which expresses and communicates thoughts and feelings and attitudes towards life. He identifies qualities: permanence, originality, craftsmanship and moral consciousness. Let us see them one after another. First, permanence. As we mentioned earlier, some writings are time and space bound. Still, they cross their time. They appeal to people all over the world. In this context, certain writings are appealing only to a particular set of people in a particular specific time. For example, a journalist writing for the newspaper, that day's readers alone may have some interest in that. Similarly, an advertisement for a product in a newspaper or on the TV may appeal to people only for a limited period of time. Whereas, some writings are permanent. They are remembered, they are discussed, they are read again and again. For example, a dramatist play King Lear, published in 1606, or a poet's ode to the West Wind, published in 1820, or a fiction writer's novel Animal Farm, published in 1945. These authors and many others hope their works would be read in the future. They like to have what is known as immortality through their writings. These writers are Shakespeare, Shelley and Orwell, as you can guess. Now, let us discuss originality. There are certain common themes. These are central to literature: life, love, death, nature or God. Then, how do our writers achieve some sense of originality in their writing? Ezra Pound said, make it new. He gave a call called modernist call. It means new ways of treating old themes using language or telling stories in individual ways. We have an example from Charles Dickens' novel A Tale of Two Cities, published in 1859. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was a season of light, it was a season of darkness. It was a spring of hope, it was a winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. Such a powerful passage. This is the opening passage of A Tale of Two Cities. Common words, but the way in which he has written is all original. The idea that he wants to convey clearly says that these are common to all ages. Now, let us see craftsmanship. Literature is not about ideas alone, that is content. It is also about techniques and use of language. There are perfect writers like Dr. Samuel Johnson, but they need not be great. On the other hand, we have great writers who need not be perfect, like Charles Dickens and D.H. Lawrence. Writers achieve some sense of craftsmanship in language also. That is why Samuel Taylor Coleridge has said the best words in the best order create poetry or any form of creative literature. Diction refers to careful selection and creative use of words. Similarly, craftsmanship or originality can be achieved in the wise selection or creation of a literary form. That is how we have more and more of literary forms today. One example that we can discuss in this context is Girish Karnad's Hayavadana. Girish Karnad came across the story of the transposed heads in Thomas Mann, and he wanted to convert that into a film, and he discussed this matter with his friend B.V. Karanth, but he suggested that this could make a great drama. That is how we have one of the greatest dramatic pieces in Indian literature, that is Girish Karnad's Hayavadana. Now we come to the last point, moral consciousness. Almost every writer has a sense of moral consciousness. What does it refer to? It is the feeling on the part of the writer and conveyed by him to the reader that the words good and evil have a real meaning, a meaning which lies beyond the ideas of right and wrong that happen to be accepted at one particular time or place. Some writers may be concerned exclusively with evil. They are called Satanists. We have two examples, Baudelaire's poem Flowers of Evil, published in 1857, and a short story called The Devil, published by Maupassant in 1886. Great writers discuss individual and social morality in their works. We have great number of examples like Sophocles, Dante, Milton, Goethe, Henrik Ibsen and Thomas Hardy. What we notice in general is human beings are attracted to evil somehow. It becomes the duty of the writer to draw their readers' attention to the consequences of the action, the choice. It is only a caution, not necessarily some kind of moral preaching. Rees gives a comprehensive definition of literature as literature is a permanent expression in words of some thought or feeling or idea about life and the world. He says good literature has certain qualities. He lists them like psychological truth or holding the mirror up to nature, originality, craftsmanship and a consciousness of moral values, which we have discussed in the foregoing slides. How do we know which is good literature, which is great literature or which is bad literature? Literature, as you know, is a creative or imaginative piece of writing. Our concern is to differentiate between good and bad literature and also between good and great literature. It is said great literature deals with real thoughts and feelings, and also it should hold the mirror up to nature. It should be life enhancing or it can be a criticism of life. Whatever it does, it should be very close to life. What matters is the quality, not the quantity of experience. Great literature shows that every human being is separate from every other. We can see this in many kinds of literature. I have one example here for you from Aravind Adiga's novel The White Tiger, published in 2008. Balram Halwai, the protagonist of the novel, throughout the novel feels lonely and he suffers, and ultimately when he succeeds, there also he feels lonely. We can find this in a large number of writings, and we can probably find this in our own life. We move on to the next part of this lecture about contemporary views. First, we discuss Raymond Williams' views from his book Keywords. He says literature is a difficult word, in part because its conventional contemporary meaning appears at first sight so simple. That is what we have seen so far. There is no apparent difficulty in phrases like English literature or contemporary literature until we find occasion to ask whether all books and writings are literature, and if they are not, which kinds are excluded and by what criteria, or until, to take a significant example, we come across a distinction between literature and drama on the grounds apparently that drama is a form primarily written for spoken performance, though often also to be read. We have something called closet drama, which is meant only to be read, not to be enacted on the stage. So certain criteria are used to exclude some writings from the domain called literature. That is why he says literature is a difficult word. We may not have difficulty when we say English literature or contemporary literature or even literature and drama, but when it comes to excluding certain pieces of writing from the domain of literature, then there will be difficulty. Perhaps the difficulty can be understood when we look at Terry Eagleton's views on literature. We have certain binaries like fact and fiction. We say literature is not factual but fictional, that is imaginative. This is what we have been saying all along. Literature is not factual but fictional, that is imaginative, but all imaginative writing is not literature. For example, Eagleton says Mills and Boon's novels are not considered to be literature. We also have another binary, ordinary and poetic language. Literature uses a special language, many writers agree, a deviant and ambiguous language that refers to itself and defamiliarizes readers, but many post-structuralist thinkers have now come to the conclusion that there is no common or what is known as normal language. If there is no normal language, then how can we have a deviant language? So how do we identify something to be literature, or how do we know what is called literariness? Eagleton says literariness is differential. It is differentiated from one another, and that is why it is called literature, and this quality of literariness is not at all inherent in the text. He says literature is loaded with values, ideology and unequal power structures, valorizing some social groups over others. That is where we have contemporary meaning of literature. When we say literature is universal, when we say literature is common to all people, then one kind of literature produced by one individual representing one particular society will valorize certain ideas of that particular group. It is well understood now. Let us also see the views of Bennet and Royle presented in this thing called literature. They say literature is a peculiarly elusive word. It has in a sense no essence. You can see the kind of close resemblance between post-structuralist idea and this. Any text can be read as poetic, even a recipe, a list of ideas for producing some kind of food can be used as a poem. Stanley Fish has done many experiments. Here is one experiment that he has discussed. He fabricated a religious poem. He wrote some names of linguists actually on the board and asked the students who were dealing with 17th century religious poetry and told them to interpret it, and they started interpreting this piece as a religious poem. They started connecting Jacobs with the Bible, thorn with Jesus Christ's crown of thorn and things like that. Now if this is a case, then how do we identify a good piece of literature or any piece of literature for that matter? Let us see certain identifiable features. There are certain features like uncertainty, purposelessness, suffering, imaginative world, politics, life and death, magical thinking and everyday life. Let us see some examples for each of them. Uncertainty can be seen in Hamlet through that famous phrase, to be or not to be. Purposelessness can be seen in Othello, where we have endless possibilities of meaning, which is true, which is not true, which is love, which is envy, which is jealousy and things like that we can see. Suffering we can find in King Lear, all kinds of experiences are there, but primary experience that we can see in this drama is all about the sufferings of a father or two fathers, Lear and Gloucester. We can see imaginative world in A Midsummer Night's Dream. A dream-like world is presented in this play. Next we can see politics in Julius Caesar, about killing the monarch to protect the people, and this is the kind of politics we can see in different kinds of world or different kinds of writing, and Julius Caesar is a paramount example. Life and death can be seen in Macbeth, where we find the protagonist searching for meaning, searching for life, but ending in death and ending in meaninglessness. We also have magical thinking in The Tempest, where we have the protagonist Prospero using magic to create a magical world. And lastly, we can find the everyday life in As You Like It, where we have the common quarrels between two brothers. Finally, we come to this transformative model of literature. A critic called Olivia Fialho has written an article, What is Literature for? The Role of Transformative Reading, which I found very useful and interesting. There are three motives for reading literature. One is hedonic, the other is eudaimonic, and the last one is pragmatic. In the first case, readers read literature for the sake of pleasure and amusement, and in the second case, readers pursue meaning, truth and purpose, and lastly, in the third case, readers look for some use, particularly something called therapy. That's why this word catharsis is well known, especially in the case of drama. When people read literature, what do they gain? Readers gain insights into themselves and others through literature. Therefore, this critic says literature transforms readers' personal and social concepts, or we can say even lives. What happens in the processes of transformation? There are 6 processes. First is imagery. When we are with a book, a poem or a drama or a novel, we imagine the setting and also the characters, that is imagery. The second one is identification. We as readers recognize certain aspects of ourselves in the characters that we read. Next, experience taking. It means when we read a literature or when we read a piece of literature, we find ourselves enacting and embodying the experiences of the characters that we come across. Then character evaluation. As we read a novel, we evaluate the characters either positively or negatively. And when we come to sympathy, we find that most often we are enabled to feel compassion for characters who suffer. We refer to King Lear, we refer to Othello, we feel for those characters, particularly for example a character like Macbeth. How come he destroyed himself when he wanted to become the king of his country? So we feel for even certain devilish characters. That is where literature has a special role. And the last point is aesthetic awareness. When we read some poem or novel or drama or short story, we notice striking and evocative words, phrases and sentences in our reading. On the whole, what we find in literature is to gain some new or deep insights into ourselves and the people around us. That's where we find literature enriching for us. To give you a summary of the whole lecture that we have presented so far, what we have done in this presentation is to offer a working definition of literature and describe certain features or views of critics like Long, Hudson, Rees, which focused on conventional views. We also went on to discuss certain contemporary views from Williams, Eagleton, Bennet and Royle to understand the post-structuralist constructed concept of meaning in literature or in any walk of life for that matter. We moved on to discuss the transformative model presented by Olivia Fialho, saying that there is a kind of transformation that takes place in us as readers when we come into contact with literary pieces. Finally, we have a quotation from Robert Louis Stevenson. He says, "The difficulty of literature is not to write, but to write what you mean, not to affect your reader, but to affect him precisely as you wish." This precision, it's not only in engineering, we have it in literature as well. Precision, engineering of words, that's what we have in literature. That is literature, and I hope this enable you to understand certain views of literature with a focus on the transformation that can be brought about in us. We have some references for you. Hope they will be very useful to you. Thank you.